was a person involved in, they're missing on Lough Erne of a jet ski, and she's the cox of the local RNLI, so she can't make it here today. So we're only going to have 3 speakers, and we're certainly going to finish on time, like, because we obviously have to go to some. So they're going to do their turn, and at the end, if we have time, we have questions. If we haven't got time, there'll be no questions. So that's right. So I'm going to ask Penny to start immediately. One second, Penny. Just say that Penny is a civil engineer, worked for a French hydraulic consultancy, was involved in projects for the Athens and Beijing Olympics, and he's now with Sport Ireland. So,
thanks so much, John. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Waterways Ireland for inviting me to come and speak to you all today at the World Canals Conference. Can you hear me okay then back with the microphone?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
You can.
I was speaking to Dawn just before when she went on her break there. She was saying the last time the World Canals Conference was held in Ireland was in 2001. So obviously the opportunity to come and speak to you guys don't come around very often. So yeah, big thanks for the opportunity to come here and speak. My name is Benny Cullen. I currently manage the network of local sports partnerships in Ireland. So we've 29 local sports partnerships around the country, one in every local authority pretty much. And those sports partnerships are tasked with activating local communities. My background, as John said, is from an engineering background. I worked predominantly in sport, designing infrastructure for the Olympics. Then I moved to a federation of sport, canoeing specifically. I spent just over a year working for Waterways Ireland recently enough, and now I work for Sport Ireland. So this network of sports partnerships is tasked with kind of increasing sports participation across the country. It's spread out all over the country, and in 2017 activated about 350,000 people nationally. So 350,000 people who are taking part in programs or in events or in tasers that the sports partnerships rolled out. This partnership, I'll explain a little bit later on, targets specific groups. We have a few stats around specific groups, 13,000 women taking part in women in sport projects. We do a lot of work with Operation Transformation. Anybody who's Irish is probably familiar with Operation Transformation. About 18,000 people took part in Operation Transformation events, and we roll out cycle series events around the country as well. The network costs about €20 million a year to run. And as its name suggests, it's a real work of partnerships. So Sport Ireland, the organisation that I work for, we invest about €6 million through various strands into the partnership. But the remaining funding comes from various partners. Local authorities invest quite a bit into sports partnerships. HSE would invest quite a lot. And then they would work in very close partnership with a lot of other state agencies, Board na Mona, Quilcha, and obviously Waterways Ireland when it comes to the canals and the waterways. A large part of the work of the sports partnerships is in supporting local community groups. So every year they'll try and establish new groups. They'll try and support those groups. They support them to self-govern. So they'll support them with governance, but also with sports-specific supports around, leading walks or leading runs or doing various elements of coaching. So they do this through a lot of their training courses. And then these are kind of the kinds of numbers of groups that they reach. About 2,000 groups a year. We know from other research that there's about 10,000 sports clubs in the country. So they reach about a fifth of the sports clubs around the country each year. What this ultimately produces is a level of activity in the country. So the sports partnership has been existing since 2001, actually the last time the Canals conference was here. Since then we run a biannual Irish sports monitoring. So every 2 years we go out, we run 10,000 telephone interviews randomly sampled across the country, and we extrapolate that to give a representative sample of the nation. And so we get an idea of what levels of activity are happening in Ireland. So we know there's about 1.6 million people in the country who take part in sport or physical activity on a regular basis. Traditionally in Ireland we would have always thought that three sports we would classify as the big three: soccer, GAA and rugby. And those sports play a huge role in increasing participation for young people in our community. However, what we know from the Sports Monitor is that as people get older, they tend to drop out of those big three sports, those staple sports of activity, and they start to participate in other sports. And this is particularly interesting, I think, for canals and waterways, because the predominant activities that we're seeing out there in the communities are activities that can happen along canals or on waterways. So those kinds of activities, the first one is gym and kind of exercise. So that makes up about 13% of the population. However, the next ones are running, cycling. The 8%, 8.2%, 8%, and 5.5%. These are self-directed activities. As people kind of grow older, as they go into adult life, they start to go into self-directed activity. They got busy lifestyles, they got busy timetables. They need to be able to get active when it suits them to be active and to be able to adapt their activity to the things that are happening within their life, unlike the structured aspects of, let's say, team sports or classics club sports. One statistic that's particularly notable as well is that 64% of the population walk for recreational purposes. So walking, running, cycling, and swimming are the largest area of activity. They're self-directed, and really they require infrastructure for people to have the opportunities to get out and do those activities. The infrastructure comes in lots of forms, be it public parks, but also things like towpaths and canals that we see a lot of around the country. I'll just flip back to this slide very quickly. What we do know from our Sports Monitor as well is that not everybody in society takes part in sport to the same extent. So the Irish Sports Monitor throws out a demographic, I suppose, of sports participation, and even more so a gradient in sports participation. So we know that those who are coming from socially or economically disadvantaged communities are less likely to be active. Women are slightly less likely to be active than men. People with a disability are less likely to be active. Ethnic minorities are less likely to be active. So a large part of the work in the sports partnerships targets these specific groups, the unemployed, disadvantaged areas. Older adults are less likely to be active. We see people with disability at the bottom, women and ethnic minorities. That's kind of the stats of what's happening in sport, the work that we're doing, and what that's producing out in society. What I thought would be interesting for today is just to give a few case studies of where sports partnerships have delivered projects in partnership with Waterways Ireland or along other waterways, just to give you an idea of some of the opportunities that are out there, some of the projects that have worked. Towards the end, I'll also talk about, we just completed a piece of evaluation in the development of community activity hubs, and what works and what doesn't work. So I'll throw in some of those insights as well. One of the first initiatives really to talk about is the Blue Way initiative. I would have been very heavily involved in that in its early days. I can remember myself, an individual called Cormac MacDonald who works in the National Trails Office in Aina Road from Waterways Ireland, sitting in a room thinking about, at the time we were trying to develop canoe trails, and this concept of a Blue Way. John Boyle jumped onto the team then shortly after that, and the Blue Way initiative really started to build momentum, largely driven by Waterways Ireland. So Waterways Ireland saw the potential in developing Blue Ways, not only just to be a water sports activation product, but a multi-sport activation product. So it kind of brought the Blue Way concept from just canoeing and water sports and swimming into walking and cycling, and even expanding it into a broader tourism product. What's interesting was the reaction from the sports partnerships. So the sports partnerships immediately saw the potential of a product like this, largely because of that demographic we see and those activity levels. The Blue Ways could satisfy cycling, walking, running, and swimming, and the broader water sports, kind of help support that self-directed activity. So we started seeing local sports partnerships all over the country trying to, I suppose, get a piece of the Blue Way action, starting to develop activities, starting to develop programs around that Blue Way product. So the infrastructure, if you like, was being complemented by program development. And we saw lots of interesting things developed. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work, some of them worked better than others. We had a great Blue Way 10K initiative, which was developed to try and get new people into canoeing, canoeing along the Blue Ways. We see a lot of park runs happening along the Blue Ways or along the towpaths. With programs such as Women on the Water, there's a Paddles Up program that's rolled out through Leitrim and Longford. And down the bottom right here, we see a lot of Get Ireland walking programs as well, which are taking advantage of towpaths predominantly along canals and at times along rivers as well. So it's not just on the water activity, there's a lot of bankslide activity as well. And I think that's where the Blue Way really managed to capture people's imagination. This multifaceted approach. It wasn't tunnel vision. I remember when we were first sitting in the room trying to develop canoe trails, we were funneled into canoe trails. So this Blue Way concept really allowed things to broaden and expand and reach a larger target audience. So yeah, as I said, Get Ireland Walking, Operation Transformation do a lot of their OT walks along the Blue Ways or along the various canals, and likewise parkrun and things like Blue Way 10K. Swimming, which surprised a lot of people, is one of the largest participation sports in the country. Both indoor swimming in pools, but also outdoor swimming. The level, this comes from our research, the number of people doing outdoor swimming is larger than the number of people doing all the outdoor sports combined. So things like hiking and mountain biking and canoeing, those outdoor swimming that figure is these sports hubs are targeted towards disadvantaged communities, the socially or economically disadvantaged communities, and are tasked with trying to increase levels of activity at a community level. They do that through 4 ways. One thing is to define and develop pathways into sport or physical activity, and then through sport or physical activity. So once they're in the door, how do you develop through that? To train people locally, to train local leadership, to establish strong organisations that can be self-directed, and to develop quality facilities. And we've seen sports hubs come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, a number of them along the waterways, and a number of them capitalising on the Blue Way initiative. This particular sports hub here, the photos taken from is from Canals, River Shore. It's not Waterways Ireland territory, but it's interesting they've used the Blue Way concept. So we're seeing it being applied to other waterways. I mean, if anything, that's proof that the idea is good if other people are stealing it and using it themselves for their own initiatives. So the example in Clonmel is booming. They've got cycling, walking, canoeing, rowing, all sorts of water activities, all built around this community sports hub concept, developing pathways, training local leadership, establishing strong organisations, and developing quality facilities. There's a real challenge, and we learned this from the evaluation that we completed this summer of the community sports hubs. So we went out to the first 9 sports hubs we invested in. The investment would have started 3 years ago. We met with the local communities. We did a whole lot of quantitative data research and a whole lot of qualitative data research. And what it threw back out is that there's a real challenge in working with the socially and economically disadvantaged communities, and to be honest, with anybody who's not active. And some of the big areas of challenge are highlighted here. The first thing is generally those who are inactive have low confidence when engaging in activity. They feel vulnerable. They've got low self-esteem. They don't feel ready to engage. And that's a big challenge to overcome that. People are afraid in some ways of physical activity. And the other piece, which is somewhat linked, is awareness. The physical activity in sport may not even be on their radar. So no matter how many Facebook posts you put up, no matter how many websites you put up, and articles in newspapers and flyers in the door, it just doesn't even register with people that this is something they might do. And they don't associate with it, so it doesn't have a relevance to them. And that's a really big challenge. That's a hard task to try and overcome. What we did find is some sports hubs seem to do it better than other sports hubs. So we had the technical piece, the strong organisations, the well-trained people. They're what we do in a way. And I'd say that the minimum we can do, or we should be doing, is a good job. That's the technical piece of the work. That's the minimum piece. However, there's this other layer that's required in order for things to really work. We captured some of that in our recent evaluation. So one of the, in some ways surprising, maybe not that surprising, every time we went to a sports hub that seemed to be doing well, we said to them, we were up in Donegal, and we asked the guys in Donegal, if you were to start a hub somewhere else in the country, what would you do? The first thing they said was, you need Luke. You need to get Luke on board. And Luke was the hub coordinator. And we asked the guys in Sligo and Cranmore, if we want to redevelop the Cranmore hub, what would we do? You need Diane. You need to get Diane in there. Diane will do it. And so what we realised was that the person, the face of the hub, was vitally important. We also realised that it didn't necessarily have to be a member of staff, it didn't have to be a professional, but there had to be a face, there had to be a personality that was associated with the activity. That people who are inactive, or and people who aren't active on the waterways, they're not going to change their mind about the waterways. But if they meet people that they like, and they meet people they can engage with, and they meet people who have empathy and care about them, there's a good chance that they're willing to try new things with those people. So people are engaging with people, they're not necessarily engaging with infrastructure or with programs. The other piece was community ownership. And this is very closely linked to sustainability. So I talked about kind of the 5 years of investment. What we found was that sports hubs that fell into a somewhat service provision model, where they just went out and delivered activity or delivered programs, seemed to have less success than hubs that took their time a bit more, completed needs analysis, met with communities, empowered communities, and helped train up those communities to lead themselves and govern themselves. And so this community ownership, community leadership, seems to be vital in order to get community sports hubs up and running successfully. Somewhat linked to the vulnerability and the confidence piece is safety. Safety and welcome. So that, 2 aspects to that. One aspect is physical safety. When I was working with Waterways Ireland, we worked in the city centre of Dublin along the canals, and there were certainly sections of the canal people just didn't feel safe to get out onto the canal. So that physical safety is vital. It's really, really important. And on the flip side of that coin is the emotional safety. So people are engaging with activity that they haven't tried before. They need emotional support. Consistency and reliability came up over and over again. I suppose especially in the disadvantaged communities. At both at a community level, but also potentially at a personal level, these communities have been let down over and over and over again. And so coming in with consistency and reliability, really seemed to get buy-in. And we saw that over and over when we talked to the focus groups. Very frequently we'd hear back, you know, can I just come because I know every Tuesday the guys are going to be there. I just know they're always there. And you know what? If I miss 3 or 4 Tuesdays because there's stuff going on in my life, I can come back and they're still there and they don't judge me and they don't give out the turnover. And that's really important. At a community level, I think it's also important in terms of investment strategy. That if you can let communities know what's going to happen to them in the long term, they're more committed to what it is that you're trying to do. Whereas if it's year to year and then all of a sudden 1 year the funding dries up, you lose all that great work that's been done over those years. So it's that reliability of funding at a community level. Not that the funding has to keep coming, but you have to know what the plan is. So in our case it was 5 years. You know, that there's some kind of indication of where things are going. And sorry, the last piece is just around progression. So it goes back to the idea of coming to meet them where they are, not necessarily asking them to come to meet us where we are or where we expect them to be. And that once they're there, to provide them with support. You know, to kind of use that programs or initiatives or events or whatever it might be to help develop them, to help build them forward. Okay. I'd like to finish with just a little story of a project I worked on in northeast inner city Dublin when I was working with Waterways Ireland. I was in the Docklands office, and we were tasked with activating the canals within Dublin City. I think we did. I mean, we made good headway in a lot of ways. In some areas it was quite challenging. One area in particular was Charleville Mall in northeast inner city Dublin. Just around the corner from North Strand Road and Sheriff Street. A lot of antisocial behaviour. A lot of both economic and social disadvantage and educational disadvantage. A lot of drug issues in the area. It's a really difficult area to crack the nut on. And a part of the canal that people felt was unsafe. The council had put benches in. A year later took the benches out because the undesirables were sitting on the benches. So look, we did a lot of work in that part of the city, and Waterways Ireland owned a small lockkeeper's cottage on the opposite side to Charleville Mall, opposite side of the canal to Charleville Mall where the flats are. The Irish Rail main Dublin to West Railway line, it runs out the back of that cottage. And Irish Rail had contacted me and basically said, look, is there any chance you can just put a massive fence around that cottage or maybe knock it down and just replace it with scrub because of the amount of used needles that were being dumped onto their railway line was preventing the maintenance crews from going in and repairing the railway line. So they had to send in hazmat crews first to clear all the needles. So basically this area of the city was a huge problem. We managed to find an individual who was interested in developing a social enterprise, a not-for-profit business, located within that college, within that cottage. Was interested in coming to a lease agreement with Waterways Ireland, and in developing activity in that canal. In some ways, somewhat of a kind of community sports hub type model, albeit at an enterprise level rather than a full-on community level. The cottage looked a little bit like this. The guy's name was Willie Whelan. The cottage looked like this when he moved in. You know, it was in a huge amount of disrepair. Nobody lived in it for quite a long time. There was a lot of antisocial behaviour there. There was a lot of drug use, a lot of drinking cans around the back and doing worse. Willie managed to engage with the local community very, very quickly. He was from the local area, so he was the face. He managed to build this relationship at an incredibly fast rate. He had the local kids in, giving them a dig out, wheelbarrows to take the rubble out. Had local people from the local community coming in to help. Nearly all the work was done on a voluntary basis. All he had to pay for was materials. And even on the materials, he was getting discounts from local providers who wanted, the goodwill in that community was incredible. Linking with local families is Willie over here on the left. And it was, they had good times and bad times. Every once in a while a bit of graffiti go up and they'd have to paint over it. But gradually, the cottage started to come back to life. They went from this abandoned building that had big steel shutters up on it, and was being, sledgehammered down so that people could get in and do drugs, into this kind of community facility. There's a photo that was taken at the Five Lamps Festival, where dancers came in and the kind of various levels of activity at the cottage. This was the very early days of the development of this cottage. And then within 3 months, as the summer took off, we started to see this happening. The planting around the lock gates, the flowers being brought back on site, which hadn't been there in years, lots of kids' activity within the canal, be it swimming or playing or jumping, lots of canoeing, walking, all that kind of stuff starting to happen. And really the story of just that small little part of a really challenging part of the city starting to change a little bit. Winnie being on site and being that face as well, started to notice things that other people weren't noticing, even community workers weren't noticing, through building relations. The mothers were coming down from the flats and saying, here, look at our kids have loads to do up to the age of 4 or 5. And then they've loads to do when they're 12 and over, because then go into the youth services. Between 5, 6 and 12 years old, that's where they get into trouble. Because they come home from school and have to, and they have nothing to do. There's no service, there's no state service really for them to slot into. Can you help us? Can you help provide some canoeing activity or some kind of activity to help the kids stay active and stay out of trouble? And so that feedback is now feeding into the youth services in the local area, and they're starting to work on those types of programs. It has loads of knock-on effects. I was reading an article in the Irish Times this morning, which again was saying how great sport and physical activity is for you, be it for your mental health, your physical health, whatever it might be. I think they were saying the first report that published that was published in 1953 that linked physical activity to good physical health. What's also undeniable is that physical activity and sport also links to social good. It helps to build relationships, it helps communities to develop an identity. Sport is cultural in its nature. What it allows communities to do is to go beyond their geographic limitation. So very often people identify themselves to where they're from geographically. So if you're from Sheriff Street, that's your identity. What sport and physical activity allows you to do is to identify yourself with something beyond your geographic location. I'm a canoeist, I'm a runner, I'm a GAA player, I'm a soccer player. And as soon as you break that geographic boundary, all of a sudden you start overlapping with people from other geographic boundaries. When you start to realise that you don't have to be defined by where you come from, you can be defined by whatever you like, you create your own identity. So all of these knock-on social benefits are there, and then in terms of the canals and the waterways, this was a really treacherous part of the city for canal boats to go through. It was very rare that a canal boat would be left overnight in that part of the city, for fear of vandalism, or for fear of theft. This activity that's now happening in that Lockkeeper's Cottage now allows and fosters further use of the canal. So it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the waterways, it's a win for the local community, it's a win for sport and physical activity, and the work of the local sports partnerships. So I just wanted to wrap up and leave you with a picture that I thought kind of encapsulates what it is we're trying to do. We're trying to develop enriched communities, which I think is some of the languages used in the Waterways Ireland strategy. We're trying to enrich communities, and we're trying to do that in partnership. So local sports partnerships, working with local communities, working with local clubs, local enterprise, and working with other state agencies. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Josie Saunders, who was formerly a regional and national news journalist, and she worked with major communications agencies in the UK before she joined Scottish Canals, and currently she's the head of corporate affairs for Scottish Canals. Away you go.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start my timer just to make sure I do not fall foul.
We have it as well.
I've been warned. Right, where's the... what's it?
See the red card?
Yes, I can see the red card. Is it this one? No, that one. Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And before I start, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavour around what Scottish Canals is and does. We're a public body that operates and manages 140 miles, linear miles of waterways in Scotland across 5 canals. That's the Caledonian, the Crinan in the Highlands, the Forth and Clyde, the Union, and the Monklands in the Lowland canals. But as you can see from here, we, like many canal operators, have a very diverse and quite complex portfolio of assets. We have bridges, we have lock gates, we have reservoirs, we have lighthouses and aqueducts, we have properties. We have a huge number of assets, 4,100 in total. And like many canal authorities, and we've heard it here before already this morning, we are facing the challenges of operating and managing these working heritage assets and the cost that the degradation that they're going through brings to all of us who look after them. So at Scottish Canals, our vision is quite simple. We want to increase their financial sustainability. We want to ensure that they are there for the future generations to enjoy. This has also been echoed by earlier speakers. And that means, in some ways, acting commercially, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. One of our second kind of vision principles is to ensure that we grow the public value that they deliver for the people of Scotland. And that is in many, many ways. Can we grow the value they deliver in terms of the health benefits, the social benefits, the economic benefits through job creation and all those other good things? And finally, we want to empower and motivate the people who live and work along their banks, those who work for Scottish Canals, but also those who volunteer with us. So we have really quite ambitious vision for delivering for Scotland. But as we all know, the canals as heritage assets, we have to think cleverly about how we do this. And I think that goes back to the theme of today's conference. We have to reimagine them for the 21st century. Scotland's canals, after their heyday in the Industrial Revolution, Scotland's canals, particularly in the lowlands, fell into a state of disrepair. If any of you have heard my colleague Richard Miller speak, you will know he's got much more impressive slides about how awful they used to look. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on, 70s, they became places that people just didn't want to go. And particularly in the urban areas of the lowland canals, they were places that people prevented their kids from going. They were referred to in the newspapers frequently as killer canals. The canals of Scotland today are a very different place, following a really intensive period of restoration, largely driven by committed volunteers. The lowland canals in particular reopened in 2002 with a multi-million-pound Millennium Link project which saw the creation of the Falkirk Wheel, the world's only fully rotating boat lift. And that period of restoration has delivered really significant change along the canals. We now see 22 million visits from walkers, cyclists, boaters, paddlers, and all manner of users. And they come to enjoy the heritage, the environment, and everything that canals have to offer. These are really thriving corridors of opportunity. And I think one of the key things that Scottish Canals has really delivered and sees as an integral part of our vision is two things. Firstly, to create tourism destinations along their banks. We all know how difficult it is to compete in the wider marketplace. You know, it is so easy to jump on a plane and spend £20 and you can be in southern Spain, you can be in Italy with a low-cost airlines. How do we as canal authorities create tourism destinations that really can compete in that kind of global arena and do so in a way that, you know, that is sustainable? On the right-hand side is a picture of bowling. It is on the western side of the lowland canals. It's the western gateway to the lowland canals. That has been transformed in the last couple of years into a place that is really exciting. It's got loads of water activity on the water. We've got boats. We've introduced an activity hub. We've transformed the arches that were part of the bridge that led over the harbour. We've got a cafe. We've got shops and all sorts of exciting things happening there. And in the next coming year, bowling is proud to be able to say that it will have its very own equivalent of the New York High Line. So if you haven't seen that and you're interested, please do come and see it. But the other strand for Scottish Canals, as well as creating tourism destinations, is to use the canals, these publicly owned assets, to really regenerate and transform communities and areas around their banks. And that is particularly important in areas of high deprivation. And nowhere has this been more successful than North Glasgow. And the picture on the left-hand side shows a wake park, which has been introduced. We introduced with our partners. And every day you see flocks of people coming to North Glasgow to be winched across the canal and jump over obstacles in the canal. And that is literally a stone's throw along the canal in North Glasgow on the Forth and Clyde from Pinkston Water Sports Centre, which is Scotland's only whitewater rafting centre, attracting 25,000 people every year from all over Scotland. Scottish Canals is working with partners as part of our regeneration to not only have those two kind of centres, if you like, but to deliver an indoor skate park, a parkour, which is a free running site on the banks of the canal. And all of this is helping to create an urban playground in North Glasgow, the likes of which has not been seen elsewhere in Scotland. So the canals of Scotland really are changing significantly. But as a canal authority, not, trying to think about how we, reimagine the canals for the modern world, I think we need to think a bit bigger and a bit bolder, and events are a really, really good way of doing this. When we started on our journey thinking that events could help us deliver some of our strategic objectives, the first thing we did is we started working in 2013 with Red Bull. Many of you will know Red Bull. They're a really great brand, but they came to us with a really challenging proposition. They said, we want to bring a champion wakeboarder and we want to take him to the aqueduct at the top of the Falkirk Wheel. We want to set cranes up and a winch and we want to fling him right along the top of the aqueduct and we want you to let us do it. Now, we're a public body. We have health and safety. This was a real challenge for us. But we worked with them for 3 days to actually build this setup and they paid us money. They paid us thousands of pounds. But I think more importantly, not only did they pay us money, but the content they created from this, which was the reason why they delivered this event in the first place, they used and they seeded out through their social media channels globally. And bear in mind, they were an international brand. That reached hundreds of thousands of people that we could never possibly hope to reach with the activities that we would want to introduce on the canals. So that got us thinking to what we could do that was bigger and better. That gave us lots of food for thought. And we spent the next 2 years working with Red Bull on another event. And I'm going to show you a video in a minute. But before I do, I just wanted to kind of give you a bit of a flavour of some of the challenges. We wanted to have people swimming in the canal, climbing over lock gates, obstacles attached to the lock gates, and we wanted to have them doing that throughout a course of the day in a really quite a deprived part of North Glasgow. We spend all our year telling people to keep out of the canal, and here I was trying to get them all to go in. And we had no idea if this was going to work. When we launched the idea, I went to my chief exec then, and he said, absolutely, I want to do this. This is exactly what we need. So we managed to make it work. But at the time, we didn't know anyone would come. At that time, nobody staged events like this in North Glasgow. So we launched it with Red Bull. 100 crazy people from all over Europe came. We had 1,500 people came to watch the event. And then 4 years later, which was last year, we had 600 people who come from all over Europe and 3,000 spectators. And we wrapped all around that street food, activities, activities on the water, screens that showcased all the positive things that happen in North Glasgow and right across the canal system. And all of that didn't cost us a penny. So I'm going to show you a quick video if I can. I don't know, how do I play this? Is it just tap in there? Oh, no. Oh, no. There it is. It's a click. If anyone fancies signing up, come and see me afterwards. So the success of that event really got us to thinking that the canals are so much more than just the waterways. We all know this. We know, and I think from my original slide, you can see we have a huge range of assets. And actually the assets that we had started thinking were great places for events, we were not really looking at the right destinations. We were thinking of the Kelpies, we were thinking of the Falkirk Wheel, we were thinking of these really eye-catching structures. And then what we realised was, actually, we've got loads of dingy tunnels, we've got loads of industrial spaces. We needed to think a lot more cleverly about it. And this next this next project that we embarked upon, I think shows that really quite well. We launched Canal Theatre. We worked with the Walking Theatre Company to create a bespoke piece of theatre that told the story of Burke and Hare. I don't know any of you know the story of Burke and Hare. They were body snatchers who operated on the Union Canal near Edinburgh in the 1820s, and there's a real mythology around them. We had a huge amount of information in our archives, but if you're creating an event, it has to be an event that's a piece of entertainment. If that's what you're creating, that's what you need to turn it from being a really historic piece of information to something that people really want to pay to see. And again, we had no idea if this would work. We had no idea if people would come to a water-logged tunnel on the edge of Falkirk where there was no car park, where we had no toilets, where we had nowhere to buy a cup of tea, and where we were charging £14 for a ticket. But I'm going to show you the marketing material that we used to give you a bit of a flavour of how we developed it.
My name is William Burke. I helped build this tunnel. Now making me fortune in Edinburgh as a resurrection man. I hope it won't be too long before you're in need of my services. Are you feeling right well?
So when we launched that, we were really nervous. We put it all out via social media. We launched it over a 4-weekend period. 800 people bought tickets. We couldn't believe it. We knew we were onto a winner. So we've taken that idea and we've started to roll it out across other locations in Scotland. We've learnt that some productions work better than others, and I'll talk a bit more about what I think makes a unique event in terms of Canal Theatre and productions later on in the presentation. But ultimately, that gave us, we were starting to build a real knowledge about doing things differently and what the canals could achieve if only we worked with really clever partners and took these crazy ideas and delivered them. The canals are also great, when we're talking about events, the canals are also great locations for filming and TV production. And although they're not traditional events in the kind of original sense, they are absolutely the type of activity that I think showcases, the breadth of venue that they provide. Canals in Scotland, and I think probably elsewhere in the world, are great venues or great backdrops for films and TV productions. We've had in the last, I think, couple of years, we've had Train Spotting 2 with Ewan McGregor on the canals. We've had Whiskey Galore, I don't know if any of you know that, with Eddie Izzard. These people pay us a lot of money, and we were in the region earning between £30,000 and £40,000 a year, but we were doing so in a very passive way. We were waiting for production companies to come to us, and although we had really strong and competitive commercial rates, we weren't marketing this in any particular way. So in the last kind of year, we have developed a directory that markets the 20 best locations in Scotland according to how dingy and dark and unique they are, and they are not the usual kind of venues. And we've really started to market those to TV production companies and to the likes of the Arts Council. We've started to see some success, but I'll have to come back, I think, next year to talk a bit more about how that is going. Scotland's Canals welcome a whole host of events right across the network, mostly from charities and community groups who use the canals as their own venue. And that is absolutely right. If we're talking about creating public access, that should continue. We see our job at Scottish Canals as supplementing that with something over and above. And the Glasgow Canal Festival is a really good example of how we think we have delivered that. In North Glasgow, I think I shared with you the challenges, some of the social challenges we face there. There's a huge transformation underway. And one of the concerns we had with this transformation is that by investing and not engaging local people, we were at risk of creating a sense of gentrification, pushing people out. And that is really not what we want to do. And that is not the basis of really good transformative change. So the Glasgow Canal Festival, we worked with all our partners in the local area. It had dragon boat racing, it had canoe try-out sessions, it had a lot of traditional activities that you would expect a canal festival to see. But I think what we have done differently, and which was always our ambition, was to start the concept, bring people around the table, fundraise, demonstrate that it was possible, and then hand it over. And that's exactly what we've done in 2018. We've handed it over to a cooperative made up of all the local partners who delivered it this year, and I think did a much better job. So we're really excited about creating a concept, proving it, and then handing it on to people to do better. We also like to learn from others. Our friends at Parks Canada challenged us a few years ago to see if we would take up the challenge of the lock and paddle. It's something that they deliver very successfully on the Trent Canal in Ontario. And they said, will you see how many kayaks and canoes you can fit into the gondolas of the Falkirk Wheel? And we said, yes, absolutely. It doesn't cost us a penny, so we'll give it a go. So this year, we used that as a centrepiece for a festival that we used to launch our season at the Falkirk Wheel. The Falkirk Wheel is one of our biggest money-making attractions. It's also one of the top 10 attractions in Scotland, tourist attractions in Scotland. And as you can see, it worked really well, and we think it will grow on to be bigger and better each year. But I think more importantly, that provided on-the-water activity. And what we now have learned is if you have on-the-water activity as a canal authority, that is brilliant. You can do lots of really exciting off-the-water activity events and bring lots of ideas to the land. But actually bringing activity and excitement to the water is a really integral part of delivering success in terms of events. But perhaps our biggest and our boldest event to date has been the Youth Urban Games. We launched it and we ran it about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Any of you who knew me about a month ago would know I looked about 21. It was the most exhausting thing we have ever done. We essentially transformed a derelict site in North Glasgow into an outdoor BMX, skateboard and parkour free running site. We turned it into a competitive space. We work with partners who operate in these kind of sectors, and we delivered competitive level stages, a 50-metre long stage, all with a view to ensuring that we were going to tap into new audiences. And we wrapped all of the activity around that. We had a stage that was run with live music by I think it was the UK's most successful record label that discovered Biffy Clyro and Snow Patrol, for any music fans out there. They ran that to their cost, and they ran it every hour throughout the day. We had a street food festival. We had public tryout sessions for kids. We had all sorts of activities happening. And I'm going to play you this video now because I know I'm just about to run out of time. I haven't got time to play you the rest of the video, I'm afraid, but you get a sense of what we were trying to achieve there. I think what was really important about that event was not so much that we organised, and I think we did organise a really successful event, attracted 7,000 people, funded entirely by the Scottish Government and sponsors. But what was really important about that was that it was the culmination of an 18-month schools programme that introduced urban sports to kind of primary school kids, 1,000 primary school kids, in the area around North Glasgow. So this was not just an event, a great event for people to come and visit. This was absolutely cementing in the transformation that is taking place in that area and making sure local people really are a part of that. So what are the golden rules? You need a unique product, absolutely. It needs to be something, we believe, that only Canal Authority can deliver, that only makes sense on a canal. That's what gives you your USP. You need a really strong brand. Let's face it, if you're going to create a brand, it needs to be something that cuts across in the marketplace. No one really wants to buy, I think, a craft beer from a Canal Authority because, customers are going to look at that and go, what do you actually know about making craft beer? So that might mean reevaluating your brand strategy, looking at how you do things differently, looking at how it fits within what else you're doing. You need really quality marketing materials. They need to be able to stand up with the competition. You need to be able to capture databases of people as well, because let's face it, we're all trying to build our audience base and bring them back to the canals on an ongoing basis. And that means in the modern day, trying to bring people in via social media, via events and all the rest of it, but you need to capture that data. And if you're doing an event for tourism purposes, it needs to make money. If you're doing it for regeneration purposes, absolutely, it needs to be cost neutral. And all of the events we have done have achieved that. And finally, you need really, really good partners. I don't know anything about skateboarding and BMXing. I think I'm really cool, but quite clearly when I was there with the Youth Urban Games and the guys had their trousers really low, I am not cool enough. So work with people who are credible in that sector. That has been one of the biggest successes for us, I think. So what's next for Scottish Canals? Well, we've learnt an awful lot over the last few years. We've brought 45,000 people to the canals in Scotland. We know that the majority of them are under 35. They're not interested in canals, but they have grown to love them. I could say a lot more, but I've run out of time. Thank you very much.
Most interesting and amazing to see what can be done in city centres. Our next speaker is Caroilin. She's the director of a company that owns Strokestown Park House in Roscommon, and it's the home of the National Irish Museum, and she's also a board member of the Irish Heritage Trust. So I'm going to
Okay, thank you very much, John. John is the fear of God put into us all, despite being a fellow Roscommon native. He's even threatened to pull the sound system if we don't keep to time. Thank you very much to Benny and Josie. That was absolutely fascinating. As you'll see, I'm coming from a slightly different slant, so learning so much about the canals. It's been a fascinating morning and day for me. So I'm here to speak to you today about a developing national trail that links the past to the present and re-engages the full entire length of the 145 kilometres of the Royal Canal with the role that it played during the deepest, darkest era of Irish history, which is also acknowledged as being the greatest catastrophe of 19th century Europe. I speak, of course, of the Great Irish Famine on Gurtha Moor. This deep and meaningful project speaks to people locally, nationally and internationally, as almost 1 million people of our people starved to death, and over another million left and fled our shores to try and save their lives and emigrated abroad, mostly to North America. The National Irish Famine Museum at Strokestown Park, which you can see here, is an acknowledged centre of excellence on the Great Irish Famine. And I'm honoured to be a board member of the Irish Heritage Trust, who manages the property. This new national trail will reenact the journey of almost 1,490 Strokestown natives, which they made in May 1847. But let me first introduce you briefly to the Strokestown story. From Cromwellian times, the Mahon family ran an estate in Strokestown from the mid-1640s until 1979. A town where the estate had tenants numbering 11,958 in 1845 and 5,800 in 1850. This in itself tells a story. The story of the loss of almost 50% of our men, women and children to death or emigration. A town where the estate is bedded into the very fabric of the town itself. As you can see here, the house at the end of the main street, an estate-built town with a street almost as wide as O'Connell Street in Dublin. A town where the landlord, Major Dennis Mahon, inherited the estate in 1845 and embarked on an assisted emigration scheme in 1847, forcing thousands of his tenants to sign over their meagre plots of land and setting them on a path of emigration to North America. This year was the year he was also to become the first landlord assassinated during the Great Irish Famine on November 1st. Making worldwide headlines, creating uproar in the Parliament in London and even as far afield as the Vatican in Rome. In 1979, Jim Callery, a local garage owner, bought Strokestown Park House from Olive Hales Packanamahan, ending the family's 320-year reign in the town and placing the house and domain back in the hands of a former tenant. While she was still living in the house, Jim asked Olive if he could go in and have a rummage around. That rummaging was to change the fate of Strokestown Park forever. In the smoking room that day, Jim came across stacks and stacks of boxes. And on opening one of these boxes, rather serendipitously, one of the first papers he put his hands on is the now famous Strokestown or Clonahee famine petition. He couldn't believe his eyes as he read. August 22nd, 1846. Our families are really and truly suffering in our presence. We cannot much longer withstand their cries for food. We have no food for them. Our potatoes are rotten and we have no grain. We've been turned away from the relief works by the Board of Works supervisors again today. We are not for joining in anything illegal or contrary to the laws of God or the land, unless pressed to by hunger. Further looking revealed boxes of similar papers and sadly thousands of similar pleas. because what he had stumbled upon was an unparalleled, precious and unique archive, which would become the world-renowned Strokestown archive, fast gaining a reputation as the most important famine archive in existence. This microcosm was the story of our town, radiating to the story of our nation, and indeed many other nations, sadly, even still today, as it played out in over 55,000 archived documents. In 1987, the house was open to the public. And in 1994, the Famine Museum was opened in the stable yard wing, in the very shadow of the big house, juxtaposing the story of those who had so much with those who had so little, and giving back names and dignity to 6,000 people who had vanished. For close to 40 years, the National Irish Famine Museum has shed light on this deepest, darkest era of our history. And in recent years, we are really proud of the many innovative educational outreach projects that have been developing in the Making History Visible mode, taking the story out from behind the walls of the museum and into many local, national, international, academic, and cyberspaces. The power of archive documents became very obvious to us again in 2014 when we stumbled upon one document, Dennis Mahon's Assisted Emigration Ship List. This gave back to us the names of 285 families, some 1,490 souls, allowing us to pluck them back from the edge of obscurity and have their names engraved on a glass memorial wall, a wall that mirrors the glass wall in Gros Isle Irish Memorial Park in the St. Lawrence River in Quebec, their last known gathering place, giving these families back not only their names, but their dignity. In 2015, another project began to develop from our awareness that our missing 1490 had walked to Dublin, some 155 kilometres, mostly along the banks of the Royal Canal. Accompanied by Bailiff Robinson and under strict instructions from Major Mahon to ensure that they all embarked the ship and none returned to reclaim their lands. And here on the next slide, you can see on the 28th of May, 1847, a report in the Pilot, a Dublin-based paper, just one short paragraph. Between 300 and 400 families from the estate of Colonel Mahon at Strokestown, County Roscommon, embarked yesterday at the quay of Dublin for Liverpool, whence they are to proceed to America. Colonel Mahon supplied them with means of emigrating and defrays the expenses of their passage and maintenance during the voyage. Just one short paragraph in the newspaper of that day. In 2015, it was decided to follow in their footsteps and traverse the country from west to east, from the glass wall in Strokestown Park to the well-known Rowan Gillespie famine statues in Spencer Dock at the end of the Royal Canal in Dublin. We were surprised at the huge interest the small group of 5 people attracted at both national and international level as they walked. And you can see this from a clip on the RTE1 News during the walk.
Of a day when hundreds of Irish people set out on border journeys
rather gut-wrenchingly, as we walked on the second day, we learned that 600 people were drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, mirroring the fate of a similar number of our 1,490 who would not survive their sea voyage either. Our past was their present, which simply isn't good enough. And we are delighted that we connect with the Syrian refugee group in Ballahadreen in County Roscommon on a number of joint projects, and that as part of the Irish Famine Summer School here, they did a storytelling showcase telling the danger-laced and horrific journeys of their emigration path to Ireland. In 2015, the walkways on the Royal Canal were still under development. But after the walk, the idea once planted began to germinate, and a number of key partnerships began to develop with Waterways Ireland, the Royal Canal Amenity Group, and the Adapt Media Centre at Trinity College in Dublin, with the aim of reenacting the walk again in 2017, when the pathways will be much nearer completion, and the future plan of launching the walk in 2019. And thus, the National Famine Way, the Famino, was born. The plan for the 2017 walk was to include international famine academics and to time the walk to coincide with the 200th anniversary of the completion of the Royal Canal to Richmond Harbour in Clondra, where President Higgins was officiating. All the time with the support of the Trinity Adapt programme, we were delighted that we were able to document and film all 155 kilometres of the walk, interviewing the academics at key locations along the route. We had 2 cameramen that were equipped with a 360-degree camera, which allowed for live tracking of the group as we walked. And here you can see the National Famine Way website, which is still live and well worth a look. And once again, the Famino garnered much local, national and international news, featuring in 2017, again on the main 601 News. And coverage in 2017 was as diverse as the Irish Times, the Finnish newspaper, and the Irish Central in New York, and many other North American publications. So let me take you very quickly on a quick pictorial trip through the 2017 walk and the actual route of the National Famine Way. Here you can see the glass memorial wall in Strokestown, which is alongside Strokestown Park House. So we go by cart and by foot on day 1 to the harbour in Clondra. We're seen off here by President Higgins on the first day, the 27th of May, which coincidentally, the pilot newspaper that we got, we didn't have at the time. So through this weird coincidence, we had actually set off the exact same week as the original 1490 had. And of course, accompanied with Bailiff Robinson, who was driving the group all along the way. And here you see the rather evocative bronze shoes that President Higgins, proper name, unveiled as a plaque to the missing 1490, and the dedication to them as being the largest known group that ever walked the full length of the Royal Canal. And these are a beautiful pair of bronze shoes, 19th century bound children's shoes called concealed shoes, that in the 19th century they used to bind the shoes, put them in the attic and pray for hope. And we believe these were left as one family set off in hope of a new life in North America. Day 2 saw us on a 19-kilometre day setting off from Moss-Trim Harbour here. You can see members of the local Historical Society and the Hikers Group. Also passing the Ballymahan Ticket House at Ballybrannigan Harbour, wonderfully restored by the Royal Canal Amenity Group. And of course, tens of thousands of passage tickets were sold there in 1847. The beautiful flora and fauna as you walk. Day 3 was set out from Abbeyshrew Harbour, 26 kilometres, and the local primary school children came out to see us off from there. Again, trekking the banks in the areas that they're more solitary, and arriving at the 26th lock, the Keeper's Cottage in Coolnahay Harbour, welcomed by the Crinnegans, who were lock keepers there since 1817. So undoubtedly their ancestors saw our 1490 trudge by in May for 1847. We arrive in Mullingar, and here you can see we stop out at two different places. One is the Famine Graveyard, which is along the feeder into the canal, and the other is the Workhouse, which is close by to the Royal Canal as well. Day 4, our most challenging day, 31.4 kilometres. Here we are departing Mullingar. We stop for welcome refreshments in the morning at Mary Lynch's Tavern, which is alongside the Royal Canal. Again, some of the beautiful countryside shots as we walked. And the afternoon stop was at Moran's Bar in the Hill of Down, where there was a group waiting for us there as well. And all along, we had the fantastic support of Waterways Ireland before, during and after the project, but especially helpful, you can see PJ here and the Waterways van, support van, that came along with us for the whole journey. We passed by the beautiful Longwood Harbour, just recently restored, and this is us delighted on the Ribbontail Bridge at the end of our longest day, the 31.4 kilometres, which due to modern technology and iPhones, we were able to translate into almost 50,000 steps, 48,111 steps. And that evening we were delighted to be able to relax with music, song and poetry provided by the community group at Burke's Bar in Longwood. Day 5 saw us speaking and talking with the local primary school students and Historical Society in Enfield Village. And here we've just wandered a little bit from the banks of the canal because they have a famine pot that features as a sculpture in the middle of the village in Enfield. Day 6, our final day as we set off from Maynooth Harbour. This is Minister Naughton, the Minister for the Environment, who walked off the first 5 kilometre with us as we headed off for Spencer Dock. And here we are arriving, walking through the Roan Gillespie famine sculptures along the quay, still being driven relentlessly by Bailiff Robinson, towards the Jeannie Johnson famine ship, or replica famine ship, which is alongside the sculptures there, and finally onto the ship itself as the final destination. And of course, you saw in the pilot our original 1490 then went on to Liverpool. Again, between the 2015 and 2017 walk, there was a phenomenal amount of coverage. We got coverage on all of the national news channels of the day, coverage during the week on the radios, Pat Kenny Show, Ryan Tuberty, The History Show, News Talk, and again, coverage with each of the local radio stations as we go through. Massive social media coverage worldwide, both in Europe, Australia and North America, and even a mention from the Taoiseach in the Dáil as we walked. Again, coverage in all the local newspapers, and North America in the Irish Central, the Irish Voice, the St. Patrick's Day Parade and the Conference for Irish Studies, all following us and tweeting and twittering and all those sorts of things as we were exhausted walking. So you can't do something like this as it's developed over the years without really good partners. It's all about the partnerships you form, and everybody has something different to give. So just very quickly before I go into my roundup, the partners: the National Famine Museum in Strokestown Park, the Irish Heritage Trust, the ADAPT Media Programme at Trinity College, Waterways Ireland, the Strokestown Community Town Teams, Roscommon County Council, the Royal Canal Amenity Group, Quinnipiac University in Connecticut in the USA, the University of Toronto in Canada, the National College of Art and Design Sculpture Department, Gros Isle Memorial Park in Quebec, and the Syrian Refugee Reception Centre in Ballahadreen being the current partners. But this is growing and I think will grow as we go forward. So the plan for the 2017 walk was to include the international famine academics. Oops, no, sorry, I've gone on the wrong place there. You're lucky that page is actually done. And You need, I tell you, Willis, you're going to pull the plug, aren't you? Nearly there, nearly there. And thus, is that a red card? Oh no. And thus the National Famine Way, the Famino, completed a small pilot project in 2015 and a larger interim walk in 2017, growing alongside the development of the pathways of the Royal Canal, and it's currently in the late stages of the preparation for its May 2090 walk. This walk is to be marked by a sculpture trail, which will speak to the famine events in each of the counties it passes through along the banks of the Royal Canal, and will also be wrapped around by a passport app loaded with information on the route, localised history, points of information, and on the amenities and nearby accommodation, all being designed by the Trinity Adapt programme. A project like this, oops, yeah, where am I gone? Oh no, I'm gone. Am I repeating myself? Oh, sorry about that, lads. So I suppose just to wrap up, what I wanted to talk to you about brief in the end was Professor Mark McGowan in the University of Toronto. I think you saw there that he's working on the missing 1490. Where did they go to? Where are they now? And can we connect with them, the families that are still in existence today? Obviously, many descendants. We know of one family where 5 children went. Only one boy survives, a little 12-year-old boy, Daniel Ty, out of his 5 family. But he goes on to have 8 children, and each of those go on to have grandchildren. He has almost 100 grandchildren, and we now believe he has close to 800 descendants alive today. So our aim, ultimately, is to have a society for our missing 1490, and at some day in the future, to see 1,490 descendants do that one of the biannual walks. But first, we hope to launch the full train, so it can be done at any time by anybody. And we believe this national trail will appeal to many all year round, drawing walkers, the culturally curious, sculpture by sculpture, story by story, and the app encouraging them to complete the entire length of the Royal Canal, so they can take moments to remember and to realise that in the past, the Royal Canal was a very different place. It was the motorway of its day in 1847. Or yes, Jay, Gurau Anonymaka. Thank you. And apologies there, I did a bit of a backwards forwards on you.
So this question is also for you, Josie. I'm Jean McKay from the Erie Canalway, and I'm just always impressed by the creativity and the big thinking that Scottish Canals is doing, and I wanted to know if you would speak to what makes that work within your staff or your organization. Why is that happening? It seems to happen very well with you, so what's driving that?
Thank you very much. Well, I think it starts at the top. You absolutely need to have someone with vision, and you have to have someone at the top who says, go get an idea, and come back and we'll help make it work. If you start from a I can't do it or we can't do it, then you're never going to deliver. If you turn up with something like we're going to get loads of people being flung through the air on a winch, the top of the world's only rotating boat lift, and someone goes, oh, I don't know, then you're never going to come back with another idea. So that absolutely is critical. The second thing is making sure that staff feel part of it. You know, they're really excited by being a different organisation. and by engaging new people. Our operational staff were so excited to see the vast majority of those young people on, covered in tattoos with earplugs and coming down and going, actually the vast majority of them never been to a canal before. And then when we share with them the 99% kind of satisfaction rate and the fact they would come back, that's what our staff like. So it's the kind of full feedback cycle.
Right. I'm not taking any more questions. And Manus is going to just fill you in on what, for the next, just to tell people what is on